These text messages prove what we all suspected. High-ranking FBI officials involved in the Clinton investigation were personally invested in the outcome of the election and clearly let their strong political opinions cloud their professional judgment.
Peter Strzok did not say anything about Donald Trump that the majority of Americans weren't also thinking at the same time.
The decision to remove Mr. Strzok off that case was made by Director Mueller based upon the circumstances known to him. It's important to understand, though, that those text messages were uncovered in the course of an Inspector General investigation that is not complete.
But it is being completed soon. As you see the Deputy Attorney General up there on the Hill, a fiery hearing today. Those text messages in question deal with FBI agent Peter Strzok, and he was sending these texts to FBI lawyer Lisa Page, with whom he was romantically involved. Here's one of them from March. Lisa Page, God, Trump is a loathsome human. Strzok says yes. Yet he may win. Good for Hillary. It is. Would be worse president than Cruz. Trump? Yes, I think so. I'm not sure. OMG, he's an idiot. He's awful. America will get what the voting public deserves. That's what I'm afraid of. God, Hillary should win 100 million to 0. I know. Then in August, and this one really took up a lot of time in the hearing, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. What is the policy, and what are they talking about? Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics and host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM. And Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. We just received this letter where they detail how all of this came out, and it is in regards to an Inspector General's investigation that's ongoing, Jonah. But that second text really got a lot of attention.
Yeah, the second text, the optics on all the text is bad. The second text is the one that actually could point to actual behavior, right, to actually taking action. There's no crime for FBI agents or Department of Justice agents to have political opinions. I know some who have very strong political opinions on the other side of the partisan aisle. What matters is whether or not you put your biases or your opinions into action. And the optics on that look bad, and I think it is this is sort of a hot mess. It's not helped by the fact that there are a lot of people who want to connect dots that cannot be connected yet, that there is no evidence of wrongdoing yet, and that there are actually two tracks that people want to muddy into one. One is how the Department of Justice and the FBI dealt with the Hillary Clinton investigation, and I do think that needs to be probed somehow, maybe not with a special counsel, but with an outside prosecutor. And then also how they dealt with Donald Trump. And right now we just don't have enough facts, but a lot of this I actually have to think is worrisome, and I've been a pretty big defender of Mueller so far.
All right, here is Trey Gowdy on these conflicts.
What happens when people who are supposed to cure the conflict of interest have even greater conflicts of interest than those they replace? You nor I nor anyone else would ever sit Peter Strzok on a jury. We wouldn't have him objectively, dispassionately investigate anything, knowing what we know now. Why didn't we know it ahead of time?
And another questioning, Rosenstein answers. Take a listen.
How, with a straight face, can you say that this group of Democrat partisans are unbiased and will give President Trump a fair shake?
We recognize we have employees with political opinions, and it's our responsibility to make sure those opinions do not influence their actions. I believe that Director Mueller understands that, and that he is running that office appropriately.
A.B.
Well, Mueller transferred Strzok for the reasons that we're talking about, and I agree with Jonah. I think it looks terrible. I think he behaved unprofessionally, perhaps unethically, if it leads to some kind of measurable behavior. But in the end, these cases are based on facts. This is not a Trump tweet. Robert Mueller is going to bring cases that are based on facts. He will not try to make up facts. He will have to defend his work. So the idea of trying to sort of go after Mueller and take him down still seems, I'm with Judge Napolitano on this, a bit overblown. There was some reporting at the end of last year before the election about how the FBI was Trump land. There was so much anti-Hillary, pro-Trump, particularly in the New York wing of the FBI, that this is the reason that James Comey ruined his reputation by coming out and doing what he couldn't do and shouldn't do. Commenting July 5th on Hillary Clinton, then releasing on October 11th, both of which she believes were fatally injurious to her campaign. And so he did it because he was so afraid she would win that the pro-Trump forces in the FBI would leak on him, making it look like he covered for her. In the end, Peter Strzok, no matter what he did in the Flynn interview, did not make up the case against Flynn.
Sure, understood, and it is based on facts. But I guess when they're talking about Andy's office, about the path that they throw out for consideration, and that they should do this as an insurance policy, because I'm afraid, he says, we can't take that risk, that Trump gets elected.
Yeah.
What are they talking about? Don't we want to know what the path is? What are they talking about doing? I mean, I'm not... We talk here about conspiracy theories and staying to the facts. This goes down that conspiracy theory lane.
Look, what we are seeing is that prosecutors have wide discretion. I'm going to disagree with AB just a little bit, where they can destroy people's lives, not even on a conviction, but on charges. And in Washington, D.C., it's very easy to get an indictment against a Republican, really easy. And what you see here is people who have a lot of power, FBI agents who have a lot of power, and it goes to this question of, did Obama politicize the FBI in a way to try to harm the ultimate political opponent, which was the Republican nominee taking on his hand-chosen Democratic nominee? And I think there are real questions that need to be answered here. Look, this is beyond just smoke on the idea of James Comey and what Obama did during this election. Think about this alone, Brett. General Flynn worked for President Obama. Obama fired him, and then eventually the Obama administration had a role in spying on General Flynn. That might have all been right and good, but this is also Nixonian and scary. And this email, maybe it can be defined. Maybe there are antecedents to those pronouns that are fine. But I think we have to know, or the FBI never really walks out of this with the same reputation they walked into this with, and I think that's bad for the country.
Right. Now, and we're not even talking about the Bruce Orr and his wife who works on the Trump dossier with Fusion GPS, which was also talked about in this hearing.
That's right, and I agree with Matt. I think the problem, though, is that there are a lot of people who want to blur distinctions that are important as a rule of law about faith and confidence in the Justice Department. You know, Strzok apparently reported that Flynn spoke, that he thought Flynn spoke truthfully. And so when Flynn is...
And actually, that's what Comey testified behind closed doors up on Capitol Hill.
So Flynn, according to Strzok, didn't lie to the FBI. Flynn later, the decision to charge him, which he has pled guilty to lie, came from Mueller's office. So you have a lot of evidence coming out that is damning about how the FBI and the Justice Department dealt with Hillary Clinton. And there are a lot of people out there trying to say that proves the Mueller investigation is illegitimate as well. And I don't know that you can yet connect those things.
But the legitimacy of the Mueller investigation comes down to one central point. Was there inappropriate contact between Team Trump and Vladimir Putin's government to rig the election? And so we're talking about all of this, and the basic legitimacy of Mueller is, can that be proven or not? And what we're talking about is all types of other information that's coming out that has nothing to do with that, but actually points to wrongdoing on behalf of the FBI.
But Mueller got his job because the President of the United States fired the FBI director.
He's looking into obstruction as well.
I still say this. We can talk about all the missteps. You can write a whole book about the missteps of the Trump administration in the first several months. But the fact is this: the American people are fair. And if the investigation doesn't find convincing evidence that there was this type of collusion, whatever that word means, between Team Trump and the Russian government, really, all of this is a waste of time.
What if they find something that leads them to believe that there was something that Donald Trump wanted to cover up about his family's past financial transactions or his own, that would make him look like he possibly was colluding, and therefore he fired Comey and did other things that suggest the obstruction of justice?
The American people are fair. And what the American people did with Bill Clinton is they thought the investigators went too far afield from what the initial investigation was. And if this, you can find wrongdoing in all of our lives. And if they find just wrongdoing, it won't be enough of it.
It depends what the wrongdoing is.
This panel, I've lost it.
You know what?
Just taking over.
No, but even